Now, here's a strange reversal of roles. Canada is having a cultural meltdown, and the US is pleading for calm. Hi there, everyone. It's Jeff, and this is Plain English, where JR and I help you upgrade your English with current events and trending topics. JR has uploaded the full lesson to plainenglish.com/448. Coming up today, Canada has experienced its largest protests against COVID-19 restrictions as thousands of truckers and their sympathizers took over Ottawa, the capital, and shut down a major bridge between Ontario and Detroit. We have an expression today, and that is in droves, and I have a quote of the week for you too. Let's get going. Truckers in Canada are fed up with the country's measures against COVID-19, and they made their voices and horns heard. It all started when a group of truckers drove from Canada's western provinces to the capital, Ottawa, Ontario. Their purpose was to protest the new rules for people crossing the border with the United States. Canada's government said that anyone who crosses the border must be vaccinated or quarantine for 14 days. That's not exactly a requirement that all international truckers be vaccinated, but it's close. No international truck driver could make a living by frequently self-quarantining for 2 weeks at a time. It was effectively a vaccine mandate for cross-border truckers. Now, most truckers are vaccinated. Some estimates say that over 90% are. But some thought this mandate was the last straw. They felt the Canadian government was overreaching with its pandemic restrictions, especially now that caseloads are decreasing and that COVID-19 is increasingly under control. As the protesting truckers gained attention, other Canadians, not truckers, sympathized with them and joined the protests. Many of the new protesters were vaccinated themselves, but they disapproved of the continuing rules and restrictions the Canadian government was putting on citizens. The protesters went to Freedom Hill, the legislative seat of the Canadian Parliament in Ottawa. They called themselves the Freedom Convoy, and they arrived in downtown Ottawa in droves. More than 4,000 vehicles and around 15,000 demonstrators amassed around the parliamentary district for a mass rally. Demonstrators decked out in the Canadian flag and other patriotic gear swarmed the streets of Ottawa, bearing placards calling for an end to vaccine mandates and other restrictions along with calls for the Prime Minister to resign. This had a big impact. Ottawa is only the sixth largest city in Canada, with a population of around 1 million people. Canadians are pretty agreeable, and their politics are not typically divisive by world standards, so Ottawa is not used to mass demonstrations. The police force was overwhelmed. The costs for the added policing in Ottawa due to Truckageddon are in the region of 800,000 Canadian dollars a day. Ottawa officials have also said that the city has spent a lot of additional money on other city services due to the protests. The chief of the Ottawa police force was forced to resign over his handling of the protests. Vehicles were blasting their horns and idling their engines day and night. Locals, many of whom are still working at home, found that they couldn't sleep at night or concentrate on their work during the day. They said they felt like the victims of psychological warfare. Businesses were hurt since so many locals stayed home. A judge banned the use of horns in downtown. And then, on February 7th, the Freedom Convoy tried a new tactic. They erected a blockade at the Ambassador Bridge, linking Windsor, Ontario, to Detroit, Michigan. This bridge is North America's busiest international border crossing. The car-making industry is so tightly integrated that people in the industry consider Ontario, Canada, and Michigan in the United States to be one region. About a quarter of all U.S. Canadian trade crosses this bridge. And the Freedom Convoy blocked it with just 6 trucks and a few hundred protesters. If the Ottawa protests were an inconvenience, this was a major disruption across many industries. The car-making industry was hit the hardest. Ford had to stop its auto assembly line in Windsor. Toyota closed 3 plants across Ontario. And General Motors cut shifts in Michigan. And this came at a bad time because the auto industry was already struggling with a shortage of computer chips and other supply chain disruptions. Similar protests were erected at other, smaller border crossings too. This caught the attention of American President Joe Biden, who expressed his discontent with the disruptions on the Canadian side of the border. Canadian police had been reluctant to make arrests and use force to disperse protesters, but they started to get serious with this blockade. They arrested 46 people at the Ambassador Bridge. 6 days after the blockade started, the bridge was open for business again. A similar thing happened at other border crossings that were blocked. Most of the protesters in Ottawa, too, have gone home, and police are trying to clear out those who remain. I felt like I was living in an alternate universe. Canada was having a political meltdown, and a U.S. president was pleading for calm. What world are we living in? Well, Canada tends to have more centrist politics. Even the opposition party in Canada mostly went along with the actions of the government during COVID. But I think this is showing the struggle that many countries are having moving from the pandemic mindset to the endemic mindset, something we'll talk about in a couple of weeks. At the beginning in Canada, the broad opinion was, we're in this together, we'll make a community sacrifice. But now, since almost everyone is vaccinated and cases are lower, the impact is lower. Now the question is, how much of those initial sacrifices do we have to continue making, possibly for a long time in the future? If people do something in droves, they do it in large numbers. Don't ask me what a drove is. This is one of those words that we only use as part of this expression. We often use this word with verbs like coming, going, arriving, appearing, attending, things like that. In today's lesson, you heard that protesters arrived in downtown Ottawa in droves. One estimate said there were 4,000 vehicles and 15,000 people. That is a lot for a relatively small city like Ottawa, which is not used to large protests. They arrived in droves means they arrived in large numbers. Do you remember the lessons we did on the immersive Van Gogh experience? People came out in droves to see the Van Gogh immersive electronic experience. That means large crowds of people went to see those exhibitions. People came out in droves to see those experiences, which was somewhat frustrating to museum directors, remember? They try hard to get people to see the real art that they have preserved. Sometimes real Van Gogh paintings. But people came out in droves to see the simulated version, which cost a lot more. If you've ever traveled to the US, you may have noticed that we have a lot of strange laws about alcohol. For one thing, you have to be 21 years old to legally buy alcohol. For another, we have dry counties where no alcohol can be sold in the entire county. Now, many states have strange rules about what time of day you can buy alcohol, how much you can buy at a time, where you can buy it, what kind of packaging it comes in. Now, when I wrote this, I was in Mexico, and you can buy a single beer at OXXO, a convenience store, and just take it home. In the US, you have to buy a six-pack. Well, anytime people want to change the laws about alcohol, people come out in droves to oppose the change. A lot of people don't want looser rules around alcohol, and they come out in droves to make their opinions heard whenever anyone wants to change the rules. That means they attend public meetings, they organize letter writing campaigns, they have protests. You never hear from a lot of these people on any other political issue. But if a state or a county wants to liberalize alcohol laws, people come out in droves. They come out in large numbers to oppose the change. So in these examples, you can visualize a lot of people doing something together. But it doesn't always have to be that way. Cable television used to be a standard amenity in American households, but people are canceling their pay television in droves. They'd rather the flexibility and better technology of streaming services. So in this example, a lot of people are doing this, but they're not doing it all together. They're doing it one by one. It's often said that people are leaving California in droves. The state has a high cost of living, high taxes, and heavy business regulation. And especially after the pandemic, a lot of Californians have decided to move out of state. Fewer and fewer people have decided to move into California. But now that remote work is popular in the technology industry, a lot of people have decided to move out of state. So we say they are moving out in droves. If you talk to people in Texas or in some Western cities like Denver, Salt Lake City, and Boise, they'll tell you that people are arriving in droves from California. That means that the people in those cities have noticed a lot of people from California moving to their cities. Here's a funny quote from the comedian George Carlin. I can't give you many quotes from George Carlin without putting an explicit content advisory in Apple Podcasts, but I can give you this one. We were talking about the truckers and how they drove all the way from the western provinces of Canada to Ottawa. So here's a funny quote from George Carlin. Anyone driving slower than you is an idiot, and anyone driving faster than you is a maniac. It's funny because it's true. We do judge people pretty harshly on the road, and we all think that we're doing it exactly right. So here's that quote. Anyone driving slower than you is an idiot, and anyone driving faster than you is a maniac. Well, that's about it for today's lesson number 448. Remember, the full lesson is available online at plainenglish.com/448. That's where you can follow along with the transcript, see translations of the hardest words, watch a video lesson, and get some extra practice. We'll be back again on Thursday with a new Plain English lesson. See you then.